I see my man is here. We are joined. Andrii Telizhenko. Haven't seen you in a while, man. How you doing? You doing all right?
Hi, Jamal. Doing okay. How are you?
I am doing well. I am better that you are with me. Andrii Telizhenko is a Ukrainian whistleblower and former diplomat. Andrii, the noose is getting closer around the throat of Zelensky. And I mean that in the most literal, well, I can't say the literal sense of the word, but I mean it in the most real sense of the word. There have been investigations, probes by NABU and SAPO. Now, the audience may not remember this, but well, audience probably would. A few months ago, there was investigations where you had the SBU raid the offices of NABU and SAPO. And Zelensky, because they were investigating people within his inner circle, was doing any and everything in their power to effectively put the kibosh on their independence, quote unquote. Now, let's be honest, these are not independent organizations. These are organizations that are effectively ran out of Washington or at the very least ran out of Europe. But that is kind of the issue that Ukraine was effectively dealing with. It's like, hey, you guys are investigating me in my inner circle. I need you to stop. And I need to somehow gain control over these organizations. This is a foreign, let's say, police force of sorts that is coming after the people who are close to me. And not just close to me, maybe even me. Now, NABU put out hours of testimony or hours of secret conversations among people in Zelensky's circle.
And Zelensky too. He's there too.
Right, but they haven't put out the audio footage of Zelensky yet, but it's rumored that Zelensky is also in those tapes. And you had on Wednesday, Justice Minister German, I think this is called Telizhenko, put in his resignation. Energy Minister Svetlana Grinchuk put in her resignation hours later. Former business associate of Zelensky, Timur Mitch, I think this is
Mindich.
Yeah, he fled the country hours before they raided his office. And we're talking about like hundreds of millions of dollars that were supposed to go to defense, security, that have effectively been laundered. I mean, they found money in his house. When you find money in somebody's dresser, like hundreds of euros, or like hundreds of like rolls of euros in somebody's cabinets and stuff like that. Yeah, that looks bad. That looks very bad, right? And so this is obviously a big corruption scheme that is roiling Zelensky's administration because each of these investigations seems to get closer and closer to Zelensky. And it doesn't seem to be coincidental that it is getting closer and closer to Zelensky. Give me your take on this. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's not just getting closer to Zelensky, it's on Zelensky.
Yeah.
I think it's the beginning of an end for Zelensky's regime. I talked about this for months and months. We spoke about this with you on air, and I talked about that there's a case in the United States, a RICO case happening since February, investigating Zelensky and his surrounding on money laundering U.S. taxpayers' dollars from Ukraine. So that's overall what is happening, and I can tell Zelensky is in those tapes. It's just his name is put on three dots. There's no like in the transcripts. There's a couple uh, where people are talking. There's names of different people, and there's one person who's just three dots or three stars in that under his name. So there's like no name. It's blacked out. But that's where he is. There's tapes of him talking out there. There's transcripts of him talking, but nobody can confirm that's him or not yet. So it's going there. And I can tell you that this is the West. Yes, this is NABU. SAPO is the Western-controlled agencies in Ukraine that are going after Zelensky. At the beginning, the West told Zelensky, they gave him a green light with this war, starting this war. He said, you can become a billionaire with us, and that's what he became, much richer than President Trump right now, I can tell you that, illegally and the bloodshed of people's basically lives and the country being destroyed. He did not close down NABU when he became president, even though he could. It was not Ukrainian agency. It was a foreign-run agency, which everybody knew about. And so it's when he made a deal with the West, he should have understood that the West is going to destroy him. At one point, when he's not just not obeying orders, but he's basically becoming very uncomfortable for a lot of people, not just within Ukraine and within the society. People just hate him, and the military and the people, the society, everybody on the streets just hate Zelensky. All those sociology they're posting out there, people are just afraid to tell the truth. But when you're talking to people on the phone or just off record, most of the people just say we just want to, we hate him, let him hang him or whatever, do something that he has to leave. So this is the reality, and the West is having the same issue. There's a problem with a guy named Zelensky. Before he was a co-star for our blood show in Ukraine. Now the situation in Ukraine is rising. The tensions are rising. And that's one thing. Second of all, he's not basically he lost the situation. He's lost control of Ukraine. He lost the situation on the front a long time ago. So there needs to be changes. They're going to just change him, try to change him to another puppet, probably of their own, like Poroshenko, Klitschko, Zelensky, all that crowd. They're the same people. There's going to be the same masters of the puppet are going to run the show. So it's just going to be a new face. So that's what it's coming to. And the criminal case right now, it's not just against the surrounding of Zelensky. Actually, Mindich is the cashier for Zelensky. He holds not only hundreds of billions of dollars of offshoring money of the U.S. taxpayers' dollars, and the money was coming for defense. The Firepoint company that was running, selling drones to the Ukrainian military, which cost twice as much than the drones on the market. Basically, the drones that are on the market are around $15,000, $20,000. They were selling their drones made in Ukraine for $55,000 each, and they were worthless. And maybe thank God they were worthless because less people died, but overall. And that's one thing. Second of all, the Flamingo ballistic missile, so the so-called, or whatever missile they were showing off, also a scam. They money laundered on that. So, making deals with Denmark and other European and NATO countries on basically producing fuel for their military through the Firepoint company. Everybody knew that it was a scam organization. It was a money laundering process for the Europeans, the Westerners using Ukraine and Zelensky's inner circle. But the main thing Mindich holds for Zelensky, not just these contracts and these money laundering processes for hundreds of millions of dollars. He holds the private pocket of Zelensky for a couple of $billions on his flash drive of Bitcoin. That's what Mindich holds for Zelensky. So he is one of the money makers, and he's basically the main pocket for Zelensky. There's the Shafir brothers, who also fled Ukraine a couple months ago. They're also the money pockets. But Mindich holds one of the largest assets from what's known, a couple of $billions in Bitcoin on a flash drive that he carries around with him. There's the Zuckerman brothers that are in the criminal case, and there's other people involved in this. But these are people, not just businessmen, but they're people who are Zelensky. Zelensky is them. So this is one organization, basically one case. And that's why it's not just against these people, it's against Zelensky himself, Yermak, and that surrounding. So they're going to hopefully something's going to happen. And maybe this is, as I said, beginning of end of this regime, and something might good happen out of this. Well, they're going to try to change somebody to something. Maybe we're going to have real changes in Ukraine.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Mindrich was initially, he wasn't even in weapons at one point.
No.
Like, he was effectively like a business partner dealing with Zelensky's
PR
career.
producer and he was the Firepoint company we were talking about producing overpriced drones, missiles, and fuel for missiles and to NATO countries. It was a PR company and basically for the production of the Zelensky's TV series Quartal 95, and they were basically what they were doing. They were basically taking in scamming models and everything else and making money on that. So this is what they were before. It was not involved in any military-industrial complex processes at all. But then it changed when the war started, and even before the war started, they began to change that. And I know that there was a big pressure from the security service of Ukraine. Anybody who wanted to open up a factory in Ukraine, to profit on the war, but also make business, but also produce drones and fight this war, they had to pay a $50 million bribe to the government to open up a factory. So nobody wanted to do that. So basically, they put the security service of Ukraine was controlling and helping the Zelensky regime to control the situation and not let anybody open up any other businesses, so they won't be basically in the market. Only this fireport would be the monopoly. Can you imagine paying $50 million just to open up a firm? Nobody would want to do that. So people just went away from this business.
Oh, that sucks. I mean,
well, that's the reality of Ukraine. That's what we were talking about. You were talking about this for years. I was talking about this for years. And the problem is now everybody just realized, no, everybody knew about this. The West knew about this is happening within Zelensky. They let him become a billionaire. They let him make money. They knew that he was scamming people. And it was not just the Westerners, Americans, the deep state within America, Lindsey Graham, neocons, deep state in Europe involved in this. They were basically sending him money, and he was laundering that money, not just only for himself, but for these people also. Well, the military industrial complex, this money was coming back to America, laundered, cleaned, and basically in the pockets of the deep staters, neocons, and to continue this war. That's what they were supporting this war, and that's what they're still supporting this war. Anybody who supports this war in the U.S. political sphere or any other political sphere who understands what's happening, or they're crazy and they're really warmongers and devils, or they're just money-making process on this. They're just profiting from this whole situation. Like Lindsey Graham is sucking up his pockets with millions of dollars, getting basically money back to him, other people within the United States government. So this is what it's all about. Anybody speaking out of the war, he's profiting from this. 99% of people are profiting. They don't believe in this war at all. They understand Ukraine is done. They're just using Ukraine and the bodies of these Ukrainians to continue to profit and make billions of dollars into their basically pockets.
Well, that's what I mean by say it sucks. Because you would think that if a country is at war, then there is a patriotic component to it where the money, and I get this is schoolboy philosophy, right? But that there's this kind of patriotic thought of, hey, we need to support the war effort and we need to defend the country. And so money that goes to defense is actually going to go to defense. So we're going to build defenses. We're going to build barricades. We're going to build areas in order to defend the troops. We're going to.
If I could add to, you said if it's a war, patriotic. The problem is this war is fake. It's real war, but this war was made up. It was not like a real war, real countries like fighting against each other for some reason. It was made up politically, built up to have this war happen. Since 2014, when Ukraine, after the coup, was ordered to shell Donbass by the director of CIA, Brennan, and I was in that meeting in 2014, beginning of 2014. He told to shell the people of Donbass because they wanted to support Russia, or they wanted to become free, or they didn't want to support the Kiev regime after the coup. This war could have ended. We had the Minsk Accords. We had every other possibility throughout the 10-year phase to not have this war. This war was made up, built into the minds by fake propaganda. And that's it. It's not like people fighting, Muslims and Christians are fighting, or Christians and Jewish are fighting, or Muslims and Jews. No, it's not even that. It's brothers, the same blood. We're part of one country. We have families living on one side of the aisle of this border. The father and the mother of the general, of the chief of staff of the Ukrainian army, is living in Moscow. He's dying there from cancer. And the Russians are actually helping him from supporting his family. This is how it is. The chief of staff of the Ukrainian army that's killing Russians has his father living in Moscow. So this war should have never happened. It's not a real war. That's why it's fake. It was made up. It was done politically to do what for the West to make money, try to dismantle Russia. Thank God it didn't happen, and now they're just making money in this. So if it was a real patriotic war, the truth was on the Ukrainian side. Yes, maybe something would be different, but there's no truth on the Ukrainian side. It's all made up. And Russia has the truth. They were trying to stop this for years, 10 years, begging, don't let us get involved in this as we are going to get involved because it's going to lead to bloodshed. If they wanted to destroy Ukraine, would have been destroyed within days. Nobody just shelled Kiev. I was in Kiev in the first weeks of the war. Nobody shelled Kiev. Kiev was shelled only military targets. I was in my balcony, not afraid of the missiles. I was afraid of the government in Ukraine because they were going to kill me because of the war for peace. So this war is fake because it was made up by the Kiev regime in the West to say, "Oh, Russia is bad." So this is why there's a big difference. This is why this is a big scam, and the scam is everywhere. And when there's no truth, the lies come spilling out one day, and this is now what the time is. They're coming out, spilling out, and we're seeing them all over the place.
Why do you think that this is happening now? That NABU and SAPO are doing this now? As you point out, this was something that's been taking place for a while. It's weird, kind of, that these organizations that were there, that were supposed to be quote unquote anti-corruption agencies, all of a sudden are like, hey, there's gambling in this establishment. Meaning it was already clear that corruption was endemic in the way that they were operating. But it's only now that they've come to this assessment of, hey, now we need to do something about it. So now we're outing people. Now we're going after people. People are resigning. People are fleeing the country. Why are they doing this now from your point of view? I know you mentioned that Zelensky has gotten, let's say, unpopular, even by Western standards. Why has he gotten unpopular by Western standards?
Because first of all, he didn't fulfill what he was supposed to do. He tried to get an uprising in Russia by having Russia invade Ukraine, provoke this war. That was one thing. Second of all, even the money-making process is there, but it's less and less and less. Before it was $350 billion, $400 billion altogether. More than half of it, I can guarantee you, was not brought to the front lines. Like that was the budget was more over than the military budget of the Russian Federation, but still they're winning.
Yes.
Russia is winning. And Ukraine did nothing. Look at the army, has nothing. They have no food even for the military in Ukraine. They're sending people like dogs to the front lines. The lifespan of a soldier from the Ukrainian side on the hotspot in the front lines is 4 hours. That's the reality. So they have nothing. They have no money to pay out to the soldiers, to the dead one, to the families of the dead soldiers. So that money was stolen. Now there's less and less money coming in, and so a lot of it needs to go to support of Ukraine, at least so it won't fall apart. So there's no interest. There's nothing to gain from Ukraine. There's no minerals in Ukraine. We talked about this. There's no $300 billion worth of minerals, so everybody understood that. There's around $20 billion worth of minerals. I told you that last time when we spoke, or $22 billion. So there's no interest in that. That's a small portion where you can make a deal with Russia, China, or around the world. You got to get much more than that. And so there's nothing to gain from Ukraine. Ukraine is just being used right now to make a deal with Russia. So that's why you need to get this thing over with, change the puppets in Kiev to continue this war maybe for a year or two if needed. And that's it. Ukraine will be thrown away by the West. And that's it. I think the deal is already made. It's just Ukraine is just being used in the situation to make a deal with Russia to get something out of Russia more, or out of China, use the situation to get China and Russia to stay apart. Anything. They need this time. And the time is, the problem is Russia has time, the West has time, Ukraine doesn't have time. Nobody cares about Ukraine in this situation, especially the West. Because Russia cares because they understand they have to rebuild it. The West is not going to rebuild Ukraine. So Zelensky and his team failed. They don't understand the reality of the situation on the ground. They lost the popularity from the Western supporters. They're not getting in as much money as they used to before to the West because there's no money coming in because the government changed in Washington and there's no much deep state and neocons in power. There are some like Rubio, but that's separate. He has the influence, but he doesn't have the capacity to increase the budget to support Ukraine. And what the Europeans are giving is 40-60% less than what was given before under the Biden administration. So they cannot fulfill their support for Ukraine in reality. So they need to change something so it won't erupt and not backfire to them, and not because when the people will have a chance to vote in Ukraine for a real person, they'll probably vote in for somebody who want to make peace with Russia and end this war. Because when I'm talking to people on the ground, government officials, soldiers are telling me they don't care about which flag flies over them. They want to live in a peaceful, normal country. And they got to get their lives back. They say if it's going to be the Russian flag, we don't care. That's what the people are saying to me on the ground in Kiev, in eastern Ukraine, and even in western Ukraine. So this is what's all about. That the West is trying to use this momentum and take control over back of Ukraine because they're losing that control. And so the people understand the propaganda which is they're being pushed into them doesn't work anymore. It's all lies. They understand what's happening. The front line is falling apart. You have eastern Ukraine is being falling apart day by day. Every month, it's more than 500 square kilometers are being taken over by the Russian military, freeing the land. Kharkiv region is being freed more and more. There's parts of Kharkiv region where the Russian troops just crossed the border on different parts, and the Ukrainian army has no capacity to stop them. So everybody understands what has happened. More than 2 million dead and wounded from the Ukrainian side. People know a lot of people lost a lot of people, a lot of loved ones on the Ukrainian side. So they know a lot of villages are empty. There's no men in a lot of villages throughout Ukraine because everybody was sent to the front lines and then never came back. So people just wanted to stop, and the West needs to take control over back of Ukraine. That's what they're doing. That's what they're pushing for a coup in Kiev, and they want to change the government to somebody they can control or take control of Ukraine back again, and at least throw another dust in the eyes of the people in Ukraine and in the West. There's a new leader. It's back on track. This guy is more legit. Blah blah blah. So that's what it's all about. That's what the West does.
Why do you think Zelensky allowed for the younger generation to leave the country? I think he allowed from 18 to 21, I
Two.
believe. Yeah,
18
okay,
to
18 to
22.
22 to leave the country. Why? I mean, this was something that the West was pushing for very hard. Klitschko just called for the age to be lessened, lowered, to allow those kids to effectively fight in the military. Why did the government allow the kids to leave?
Because so much pressure within the society that it could have erupted against them uncontrollably. Because usually the coups, the revolutions are done within the control by somebody. Somebody, it's usually the West does those pretty well. I can tell you that the West does great work on changing leaders and leadership around the globe illegally, and they wanted to take control. So, and plus, Zelensky understood it himself. He needed that to have more time and power, maybe settle things down. But if he didn't do that, it would have happened in a much more aggressive way. There's a lot of people who came back from the front lines, soldiers who, with weapons, not just weapons, machine guns and grenades, they came back with armored trucks and vehicles running from the front lines, having them with them, basically stole them from the military. And can you imagine this force, even a couple of thousand people with military training, some military training with weapons, aggressive. They have no. Basically, they were sent to the front lines to die, but they saved themselves. They're going to go on the government, so they need to lower this pressure. The people would support them, so that's why he did it. He thought that it would work, but it didn't. It only made it worse for him because people did flee Ukraine. A lot of people tried to save their lives, went out of the country, but at the same time, they still have a capacity of around, I think, 3 million or 2.5 million men who are still in Ukraine by the books that they can take. They're hiding all over the place that they can use them and send to the front lines to fight and to continue this war for another year or a year and a half. So they calculated it pretty well that they still have the capacity of the 25 and up to use to fight this war and try to do this maneuver, PR stunt, to try to lower the pressure within the society.
Who do you think they're trying to get? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about Zelensky. Is that the person who you think they're trying to put into place?
The West, yes. The West, yes. He's a total. I don't want to say the guy doesn't understand anything. Like you have to like see him talk. He doesn't know what he's talking about within the political sphere. Maybe he's a good military guy, but I doubt it. He lost so many people when he was the chief of staff. Basically this war happened under him, and he was provoking this war, saying that 6 months before the special operation started in Ukraine, saying that we're going to go have our tanks on Arbat in Moscow. Look it up. It was a thing he said in August of 2001. Zelensky talked about it, that he's going to drive a tank through Arbat in Moscow, that he's going to be basically taking over Moscow. And then when the war started, he lost everything. And then he was saved by the British and sent out to London to protect him so they can change him. And because he doesn't understand anything that he's been told, he's going to be a good puppet like Zelensky. The same thing, he doesn't understand any political moves or maneuvers. So he's going to be a very useful idiot to control and within the Ukrainian government or the ski regime or Klitschko. So it's the same crowd. The problem is these people are Klitschko is a German citizen. He's owned by the West. Also goes to Washington regularly or has lobbyists in Washington. Poroshenko, the same thing. Zelensky is basically controlled and backed by London. And maybe the United States is going to back him at one point. So these people are not for Ukraine. None of them are for Ukraine. All of the politicians who are in Kiev are not for Ukraine. Even Dubinsky, who's in prison, talking about Trump and saying the right things from his mouth, but he is basically out of 20,000 people who are political prisoners in Ukraine, he's the only one who can tweet 10 tweets a day, post and talk about it, and looks better than most of the people who are free and in a suit in a courtroom, basically having his beard done, his hair done, everything's okay with him, and he's basically as a political prisoner saying that he's talking that he can take over Ukraine. These are puppets, puppets for the same reason. If something changes, they're going to be the same people in charge. Same people, the same puppet masters are going to control all these people. All the real opposition is the ones who actually are in kill lists, who actually had to flee, who are not being let out to speak, who are in prison but they cannot speak from prison, like people like Nestor Shufrich, for example, a politician in Ukraine who is in prison. He cannot speak. Kolomoisky, I don't support him, but the guy is in prison, but he doesn't tweet. He doesn't have people tweet for him. Like he's an oligarch. The guy has billions of dollars. He cannot buy himself possibility to have his lawyers tweet for him and come in court and speak whatever he wants. No. So this is you have to understand where there's the reality and where there's fake. A lot of Ukrainian politicians are fake. So anybody who they change for the West is not going to be good for Ukraine. You need somebody who can come in, who's going to be neutral, who will come in and actually make real peace in Ukraine and make a deal with Russia and actually stop this war. That's what the person who we need to. And some of those people are in Russia. Yes, they are. Some of those people are in the West. Yes, they are. But a lot of people are still working with the West, like Arestovich, Dubinsky. I have a lot of questions to those people.
Give me a name of somebody who you think will be a neutral, middle of the road person who would be willing to do that.
I don't want to name names. You have to understand. You have to have people who were in the Ukrainian political sphere. Okay, for example, if you want to name, but it's not I'm backing him up or supporting him. Azarov, Nikolai Azarov, right? He was a former prime minister. He was a very good prime minister. Under him, the economy was pretty well. He knows good politics. He knows actually the economy of the country. He knows how to make a deal with Russia. And he was there from the beginning of Ukraine. He was trying to do stuff. So he actually knows what he's talking about. And he is not just a politician, as most of the people who are in Ukraine. He is a statesman. Ukraine needs a statesman who actually doesn't have his advisors telling him what to say, because there's some right now young members of parliament who fled Ukraine, and I know them personally, but they're saying the right things, but they have their advisors telling them everything what to say. On their own, you put them out to speak and tell them, give me understanding what your future Ukraine is going to be. It's not going to give me anything because he doesn't understand what he's talking about. Yeah. We need a person actually who has a background in government affairs, who actually had some part of controlling something in the government, good or bad, but he actually had some basically understanding of how government works. You cannot just have a person like Zelensky come in. We had this nonsense before. So this is an example, a statesman. We need a statesman. For me, Azarov is a statesman. I don't know if he's going to be the leader. I don't support him. But I'm just saying as an example, that's kind of person like to look up to and to look for people like that who can come into Ukraine and actually start digging through the rubble and rebuilding the country, making peace, not just with Russia, but with Belarus, with former Soviet countries, with Hungary, with Slovakia. Even with Poland right now, Ukraine has shitty relationships. Sorry for my language, but even
You're fine.
just rebuild that for Ukrainian's sake, because Ukraine had a possibility to be in the middle with Russia and Europe to make profit out of it. What Turkey is doing, have a person like Erdogan run Ukraine, a statesman who can be on both sides, or like Lukashenko or like Putin. If Ukraine would have somebody like that, we would have no war. We would have a different country. And Ukraine at least would be Ukraine, but we will not have Ukraine anymore. We will have something else.
Something confuses me, and maybe it confuses me because I didn't live in Ukraine. So William Burns wrote this memo, "Net means net," and in the memo he pointed out that frictions over NATO membership is going to provoke a civil war that Russia's not going to get involved in, but it wouldn't have a choice but to do so. The part that I'm focusing on, though, is that frictions over joining NATO were effectively going to provoke a civil war. The frictions over NATO were that extensive. I mean, like, it was that. There's a movie, I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but it goes into Ukraine, and it talks about how Ukraine was not this fractious, friction-filled fight before 2008. Like, before the NATO issue became an issue, that people weren't at each other's throats, that it didn't look like there was going to be a civil war, that this stuff was kind of steeped in from the outside. Is that the way you see it too? That this wasn't an issue per se. This was an issue that was somewhat created, not an issue that was
Yes,
already there naturally.
yes, that's what it is. That's what I'm talking about. This war is fake. Like, it was politicized through propaganda from one side. It made basically what they did is when they started moving the NATO thing into Ukraine, they lured Ukraine into the NATO thing by promising that Ukraine is going to join NATO, but at the same time they needed Ukraine to have a civil war within the post-Soviet countries and Russia get involved, because they thought what Brzezinski, adding to what Burns wrote, but what Brzezinski wrote before, is Russia's going to fall into different pieces. That's what they needed, the outcome. The United States and the West tried to do this 100 years ago, beginning with the Civil War, or with the end of the Russian Empire. That's what they tried to do, with Lenin coming in with billions of dollars, whatever.
Yeah.
That's I don't want to go into history. Like, people are going to
No, you're
criticize
right.
me for that. But
Germany used Lenin like a bomb.
they
Yeah.
tried to do that. Everybody, you had 100 years ago, they had the British, the Germans, the Americans involved. Trotsky was from the United States. Like, he came in with a lot of, he was not from the United States, but he had a lot of people from the United States come in to support that. So basically, the West tried to destroy Russia 100 years ago. It didn't work out. They tried to do it during World War II. After the World War II finished, Churchill tried to go into Soviet Union. The unclassified files right now we see didn't work out for him. He never made it, and that was because Europe was also destroyed, and they tried to destroy Russia. But now they did the same thing with Ukraine, because they had two Slavic nations fight between each other, like Russia and Ukraine, which are very close. Ukraine is even much more closer to Russia than Belarus is. So you have two countries fighting to each other, and you have a president in Russia, which will try to topple the government in Russia and have Russia break up into different pieces. But they had that already prepared in Russia. They had centers, all these Navalny, all that so-called Russian opposition working for the West. I knew all these opposition. I knew Boris Nemtsov. I knew Ilya Yashin. They told me personally how it worked. They were getting money from the Norwegians, €1 million, from the Europeans, from different other European countries, officially, or unofficially, but officially into Russia, and they were using that money to bribe people around Russia to bring forces to try to topple the Russian, basically, government and have it fall apart into different pieces. So this is what it was all about from Ukraine. They lured Ukraine into this promise of NATO, and which everybody understood that we'd never join. I was studying in Washington in the university in 2007, and we were told directly by a professor, Ukraine cannot join NATO because it will start a war. Like, it was common sense. Like, there are spheres of influence. The same thing with Canada or Mexico would join ODKB, or the Russian military alliance, or Chinese military alliance. You would have the U.S. Army come in and have a special operations of their own within a day. They would bombard the hell out of Mexico City or Ottawa. I would tell you that. Russia waited so long, begged, please do not get involved. Please stop. Let's negotiate. We'll give Ukraine to the EU, but not NATO. Let's talk about this. No, nobody listened. Everybody thought that Russia's weak. The Westerners watching too much movies think, oh, Russia's weak. They can have these old bad Russian guys with the bad accent that are going to fail. But it turned out that Russia was stronger than anybody else expected, and because the truth is on their side. That is also a big factor. These guys were fighting with basically fake news, politicizing everything, and Ukraine was always okay to Russia. Yeah, it was. They had some influence of nationalistic movements, but before even 2004, the first coup, the so-called Orange Revolution, everybody hated the radicals. If you would say pro Bandera in Ukraine, you would say everybody you'd be toxic. Anywhere, even in a small village in central Ukraine, everybody hated like nobody for being pro Bandera in 2003. You'd be toxified in any local village, even in Western Ukraine. But it all turned. They started to push this narrative, push that everything's okay, pushing that Bandera is a hero, small pieces by small pieces, Telizhenko, radical parties, the right sector, coordinated by the Security Service of Ukraine, changing people within the Security Service of Ukraine after the first coup. When Yushchenko came to power, you had the Security Service of Ukraine, you had a whole sector having FBI and CIA agents working in there. Basically, changing people, taking people, firing people who they understood will fight for their country. Statesmen, they would destroy statesmen within the service, and they would have nobody else in 2014 to protect the government. So that's why it was all fell apart, because it was pre-made. It was made to do so. It was a fake project. If Ukraine had a chance to get its real independence, because there was no country like Ukraine before. Look into the history. It was the Rus. Then the territory of Ukraine was taken over by the Polish, the Poles, and the Lithuanians. And then Ukraine came back to Moscow under the hetmans in 1654. And it started thriving because during the Lithuanians and Poles, Ukraine, they tried to Catholicize Ukraine, put Catholicism into Ukrainians' minds, but it didn't work out. The people on Ukrainian territory fought against it because they were under the Moscow Church for years and years, for more than 1,000 years. And this is what was all about. We were always part or connected to Russia or the Moscow Empire before, and now then Russian Empire. It was all interconnected. We were all one under their rule for years and years, and we were interconnected. We were brothers. Now they said, "Oh, this was not never the case. It was all bad. Everything that you were taught before was propaganda by the Soviet Union, by the Russian Empire. It was all fake. It never happened. You were always Ukrainians. You were the ones who actually dug up the Black Sea, and even they were teaching in Ukrainian textbooks that Jesus is Ukrainian, that the French came from Ukraine, that all the Europeans came from Ukraine, like that we are the.
Wait. Did you
That's
just
what they're
say
teaching.
they were teaching in textbooks that Jesus was from Ukraine?
Yeah, in Ukrainian textbooks, that he says they allegedly took some DNA tests and said that he is from Ukraine. He's not Jewish. He's from Ukraine.
Wow.
Yes, that's how they put into the minds of
Wow.
people that they are a better nation than anybody else. And when you put that in, that's Nazism. When you put that into the people's minds that you're higher up than somebody else, and then they control that pride, Nazism, fake news, propaganda, teachings from the government and from the outside, the Soros groups producing all those textbooks. Look into the textbooks that were produced in Ukraine and printed after it got some independence, especially after 2004 coup. Most of the textbooks on history and not on math, but on history. Soros organizations funded them. Open Society funded those textbooks. They needed to brainwash Ukrainians. They needed this war. That's why the problem is Ukrainians bought this cheap shit information and they went for it. And the problem is that the Ukrainian politicians wanted to sell off to Americans. They were wanting to sell off. They were running and go to the U.S. Embassy, selling their souls out because they had their money in America. They wanted to flee to America. They wanted to have everything connected to the West, and that's it. They sold the country out. That's why we have this. Not just because of the West, but Ukrainians also were the problem of this. The Ukrainians who sold out to America. Actually, they were one. The U.S. Embassy wanted to buy me out when I came out with the truth against Ukraine involvement in the U.S. elections in 2017. The U.S. Embassy It had people talk to me. Ken Toko was the political officer. He talked to me for a couple of hours and said, "Look, if you get your words back, we'll help you out. We'll get you citizenship or something like that. We'll support you. We will not destroy you politically. Just take your words back. Say you made a mistake." And then another couple of years later, they also approached me and actually advised me to do the same thing. And they said, "We'll give you something, residency in the United States, something like that." So basically, there were people in with that kind of stuff. I never bought that stuff. That's why I'm under sanctions. And that's why I have a problem right now. But a lot of people in Ukraine, having the money and the possibility to fight for the country, they bought for that and they sold their souls to Anglo-Saxon world, the Pan-Americana world, or destroying Ukraine today, and they don't care. They'll all flee to America. They'll all flee. Where the former Minister of Defense of Ukraine is in Miami. His daughter bought a villa. I'm talking about Reznikov. His daughter bought a villa in Spain for $10 million. That's where they are. They're not in Ukraine. They're not fighting. Where is the foreign minister of foreign affairs of Ukraine, Kuleba, who said we're going to fight with shovels with the Russians? We don't care. His family is in the West, is in the United States. He's teaching in Harvard, some project. So that's where he is. They're all bought off by America. This is what this war is about. This war is the deep state against Russia. Problem is, Ukraine is being used.
Andrii, just amazing. I am blown away by some of this stuff. And it's always like how a society breaks down is always fascinating to me. And to my point of view, it's always external influence. I mean, yeah, societies may crumble at some point, but for all intents and purposes, a lot of times it's external. Andrii Telizhenko, man, thank you for this. I always appreciate you joining me. I always appreciate your breakdowns. You give me a window into something that helps me understand what I'm looking at in a way that, it's kind of difficult to get from outside looking in. So thank you for this. Andrii Telizhenko, he's a Ukrainian whistleblower, former diplomat. Be safe, man. You have a
Thank
good
you,
one, okay?
Jamal. Thank you to everybody. God bless.
Thank you. All right. Jesus, that is rough. Jesus was Ukrainian. Yeah, the breakdown is fascinating to me.